Hey everybody, and Tony here with a review of Donizetti's Anna Bolena, which was live from Munich's rtnerplatztheater. The conductor was Howard Arman, the staging was done by Maximilian Berling, the costumes were done by Inge Schäffner, the lights were done by Maike Ebert and Raphael Kurich, the chorus master was Pietro Numico, the dramaturg was Andras Borbelli T, and this was a semi-staged and reduced orchestra version by Tony Burke. I was quite excited to check out this particular semi-staged version of Donizetti's Anna Bolena because Jennifer O'Loughlin, who I mainly knew her in a lot of lyric coloratura soprano roles, made her role debut as this particular Donizetti queen after singing Maria Stuarda about a year or 2 years ago at that very same theater. I will gladly talk about her singing much later in this review, as well as that of her co-stars. But first, my thoughts on this semi-staged version of Anna Bolena by Donizetti. These were the measures that were taken to make sure that the performers and everyone involved, from the orchestra to the production, were safe, especially with all of the social distancing occurring. But what I managed to see from this particular semi-staged and reduced orchestration version of Donizetti's Anna Bolena was that it was able to work with what it had. In terms of the sets, I definitely liked the video backdrops of what we see in snow when Anna Bolena is about to be executed. One can interpret it as the winter of her discontent, not only being married to Henry VIII, but also in terms of her conflicting feelings, as well as the imminent death that she was about to encounter at the scaffold. On top of that, the chorus members were arranged as if though they were a sort of Greek chorus commenting on what is happening throughout the opera. And the costumes, though simple, were an eclectic mixture of old and new. Old being the time of Henry VIII in the 1530s, and new because there were even some men who wore 16th century vests combined with modern day black pants and modern day dress shoes. So it was a very interesting and eclectic combination. And in terms of the reduced orchestration, at first I had my doubts because it didn't really have the grandiosity I would associate in terms of a bel canto opera. But, like I said before, it managed to work with what it had. And even though I felt like it was quite a shame that there were some parts that were cut, at least the orchestra managed to work with what they had and make it something that was quite fascinating in its own special way. So even though I had a few mixed feelings about this particular semi-staged and reduced orchestration version of Donizetti's Anna Bolena, what they managed to do in terms of the collaboration they managed to pull off, as well as make everything come together in a way that managed to keep me invested, was quite well done. And now we get to the singers, the very part of this review I am most excited to talk about, starting off with Jennifer O'Loughlin as our titular heroine. I have been following her career for many years. I have mostly associated her in singing the lyric coloratura soprano repertoire from the likes of Lucia de Lammermoor, Gilda, Violetta, and even Constanze from Die Entführung aus dem Serail, as well as Frau Flut from Nicolai's Die lustigen Weiber von Windsor. To see that she's alternated her usual lyric coloratura soprano roles with roles such as Maria Stuarda and now her recent endeavor as Anna Bolena was quite interesting. At first, I was quite skeptical in terms of how she was going to fare, because I would never associate a lyric coloratura soprano singing Anna Bolena, though that did not stop Beverly Sills from tackling the three Donizetti queens and finding her own bit of success in each of these three roles. In fact, that is just how I felt about Jennifer O'Loughlin as Anna Bolena. She was essentially following the footsteps of Beverly Sills, in which she is a lyric coloratura soprano attempting a dramatic coloratura soprano role. It was not the first time though, but that was my impression of what she did. Granted, that does not mean that she was a bad singer. She was far from it. She was meticulous. She had an eye for all the musical details that were there, and she knew how to tackle this role with elegance, class, femininity, charm, and so much dimension in terms of her skills as a singing actress. At times, there were moments that she sounded just like June Anderson in terms of that heart-wrenching and poignant timbre that she was able to pull off in the high notes as well as some of her middle notes. However, if there was one part of her voice that I'm not particularly crazy about, it was her chest tones. I felt like there were times that her chest tones were lacking in depth, lacking in roundness and richness, and there were times that it sounded hollow at worst. And going back to her voice as Anna Bolena, it's not a voice I would associate with this queen, because I would associate this role to belong to a true dramatic coloratura soprano, like what Maria Callas pulled off, like what Joan Sutherland managed to pull off even though it was quite late in her career, like what Christina Dötterkom did in an album that she did in the 90s, even though she would have been such a fine Anna Bolena and probably would have rocked it in the role in its entirety, and even what Dimitra Theodosiou in her prime managed to accomplish, as well as what I would have loved to see in Clara Kolonitz, and even what we had today in the likes of Marina Rebecca. Those huge, wide-ranging voices were what I would associate with Anna Bolena. With Jennifer O'Loughlin's voice, it was more svelte, and it was lyrical in its approach. But nonetheless, her musicality and how she composed herself as a musician was quite awe-inspiring. And overall, this was definitely her show from beginning to end. So whatever shortcomings Jennifer O'Loughlin had as Anna Bolena, they can be easily forgiven because she was an artist who proved herself to be meticulous and who proved herself to be daring in this role, as she managed to sing Anna Bolena with sufficient class, sufficient beauty, and a fine technique that I would love to see a lot more polished as time goes by. So I still have to give my hat off to Jennifer O'Loughlin for a job well done, and I would love to see her keep on going from strength to strength, because that is a nice instrument right there, but it could be a lot more enriched in depth and in terms of dimension. I do not want to see her star fade. There is a lot that she's got to give, and I cannot wait to see a lot more of her. Graduating from the role of the court musician Smeton to the lady-in-waiting Giovanna Seymour, as well as the seconda donna part of that particular role, is Margarita Gritskova. And what I managed to hear from her is that she managed to grow as a singing actress. There were times that her voice could be a little bit more ironed out in terms of the technical prowess she pulled off. There were times that I felt like there were tremolos in her voice, and there were times that I felt that some of the notes she produced were a bit high on the larynx when she could have used a lower larynx to produce those said notes. And there were also times that I felt that she could have used more chest voice and had her voice a lot more coordinated. Regardless of whatever hiccups she still had a voice that continued to grow in depth and in potential. On top of that, she was an engaging actress who made Giovanna Seymour a conflicted yet strong young woman who combines those guilty feelings that she has of her own conscience with the ambition and strength and gutsiness that she has as a woman of the court. She is definitely someone I would love to see keep on growing in terms of repertoire, in terms of technique, and in terms of her overall skills as a singing actress. This is someone I have seen grow from doing all of these small character parts to on the verge of doing more leading lady roles. And I would definitely love to see her go from strength to strength. There's a lot of potential to grow in Margarita Grickova's voice, and I would also implore her to check out the likes of Ebestignani, Elena Nicolai, Guerina Fabri, Eugenia Mantelli, Armida Parsi Pettinella, in order to get a good idea of how these mezzos and contraltos used their chest voice to the best of their abilities, and even check out the likes of Giulietta Simeonato and Shirley Verrett, who are two of my most favorite Giovanna Seymours in terms of how they managed to lunge their high notes. And sure, I would have loved to hear Margarita Grickova also sing the high C alongside Jennifer Loughlin, but I still have to tip my hat off for her for what she was able to accomplish as Giovanna Seymour. So here is hoping that Margarita Grickova continues to go from strength to strength, and here's also hoping that her star does not fade anytime soon. Then we have a name who is really new to me in the form of Anna-Katharina Tonawa as the court musician Smeton. From what I managed to hear from this young mezzo-soprano, there is a voice that spells great potential and great musicianship. How she was able to handle Smeton's music was quite well done, even though she could use a lot more chest voice and better coordination throughout the registers. There is a voice that does spell a lot of potential to grow. There is a voice that is quite rough around the edges, but with further polishing and with further vocal discipline as well as growth, we will see someone who can have a great international career. And her skills as a singing actress prove just that. She was able to give off that youthful ardor in this court musician, and she was able to make him quite likable in his own way. And I would have also loved to hear her sing the cabaletta. That would have been a very wonderful moment to see Miss Tonawa work her vocal skills to the max. And I also implore her to check out the likes of Ebestignani, Giulietta Simeonato, and Fedora Barbieri in terms of how these ladies also used their chest tones. And in terms of Giulietta Simeonato, Gianna Pederzini, and Giuseppina Zinetti, I would also love these mezzos to be her other sources of inspiration in terms of how these ladies worked well with their voices, both the high and the low, so that she can also get a better understanding of how she can also take advantage of her fine instrument. This is definitely a fine star in the making, and here's also hoping that she will be on the cusp of a great international career. I had mixed feelings with Sava Vemitz as Henry VIII. On the one hand, I do enjoy the fact that he was able to make this monarch cold, calculating, and quite serpentine in his movements and his presence. On the other hand, there were times I felt that his voice was quite woofy and monochromatic. There were times that his voice lacked dimension, lacked in all these colors, and it lacked a certain strength that I would associate in any basso cantante singing Henry VIII. Granted, what he managed to do with this part was all right at best, but it could be a lot better in terms of how he can make his voice grow in depth and in strength. Because who I have in my ears in terms of Henry VIII or Enrico are the likes of Plinio Clavassi, Nicola Rossi Lemeni, Nikolai Gyaurov, Cesare Siepi, Evgeny Nesterenko, Paul Plishka, and Samuel Ramey. Those were definitely basso cantantes I would associate singing this particular role. What made these gentlemen absolutely fabulous in that role was their overall great coordination of their voices, as well as the virility, that squillo, and that overall depth that I love in any true bass singing Enrico. Compared to these bassos of the past, I felt like Sava Vemits was a bit of an underdeveloped bass baritone. I would definitely love to see Mr. Vemits grow in terms of his vocal prowess. There's definitely some potential to be found there. If he can work on his squillo and work on the deeper parts of his voice, as well as activate certain vocal muscles that are necessary to produce those great tones that bassos such as Jerome Hines, Cesare Siepi, Raffaele Arie, and Giorgio Tozzi, as well as Nikolai Gyaurov, Nikolai Gyuselev, and Evgeny Nesterenko, as well as the great Giulio Neri could produce, then we have ourselves a fine basso we could look forward to. He should definitely look into those bassos in order to emulate that richness without giving in to artificial darkness. In fact, that was sort of his Achilles heel. There were times that his voice was artificially darkened to make this character come to life when it should be darkened in the natural way. So I really do hope that Sava Vemits will continue to keep on growing as a singer, because there is some potential to be found in his voice. And here is hoping that he eliminates that ingolata swallowed part of his voice and go the natural way, complete with squillo, complete with coordinated head and chest voice, and a much better technique, because I would definitely love to see Mr. Vemits grow. He has a promising career with an equally promising repertoire. I do not want to see his star fade prematurely, because that is someone I would love to see in all these great basso parts. When he continues to develop his technique in the right way, then he will definitely conquer them with bravado. Lucian Crescents was a fine and decent Persi. Granted, he did lack the squillo that the likes of Gianni Raimondi, Francisco Araiza, and even Aldo Bertocci had, unless I forget about Juan Oncina. But what he managed to accomplish as Persi was a fine voice that had a lot of good moments. There were several moments in which I felt that his voice was quite well coordinated throughout the registers, even though I felt like he could have lunged at certain high notes a la Franco Corelli, Giacomo Lauri Volpi, Chris Merritt. I still have to give him credit for what he was able to pull off as Persi. So here's hoping that he will continue to grow. Then we also had equally decent singing to be accomplished by Timos Sirlansis' fine, virile, and handsome Lord Rochefort, and I do hope that he continues to grow as a singer, because that is definitely a fine basso voice right there, as well as Juan Carlos Falcon's characterful Sir Hervé in terms of what he was able to accomplish in this particular role. So overall, the singing was decent at best, but the star of tonight was definitely Jennifer O'Loughlin as Anna Bolena. She definitely stole the show in her own special way, and even though she was not a true dramatic coloratura soprano, she still had me eating at the palms of her hands regardless. And the conducting done by Howard Arman was quite well done, as he kept the orchestra and chorus together, and the chorus and orchestra of the Platztheater were quite good all throughout. So overall, with a very interesting semi-stage production of Anna Bolena, as well as some really good singing to be found in Jennifer O'Loughlin as the titular heroine, tonight's viewing of Anna Bolena was quite a treat. Sure, the singing could have been a whole lot better, but I was quite satisfied with what I managed to have from Jennifer O'Loughlin in the title heroine. And for those of you who saw this particular semi-stage version of Anna Bolena, what'd you think of it? Did you feel that Jennifer O'Loughlin stole the show as the title heroine? Was there another singer who stole her thunder? Or did you feel like the singing could have been a whole lot better? Comment below and let me know. Well, that's all for now. Be sure to tune in for another review. So until then, take care everybody, and happy holidays.